Picture this. You're a castaway on an island, you just woke up, and you gotta figure shit out. You go try to collect some coconuts and realize that there's this other man on the island, also a castaway, who was there before you, and he claims that all the coconuts belong to him, and that you can only get one of his rightful coconuts if you perform some sexual behavior for exchange of some coconuts. Prostitution is the deal. Proposed to the ANCAPs is a dilemma. Well, the non-aggression principle. Thou shalt not steal other people's property. This this guy before you owns all the coconuts, supposedly, allegedly. So, what is the ANCAP to do? He has to say that you have to abide by his right to the coconut, and you ought not steal the coconut for your survival. Ha! Got you, ANCAPs. Got you, libertarians. Got you, anarchists. How are you going to rebuttal to that? Your silly little non-aggression principle is irrational, and we're going to do away with it for something better, like um, socialism. Anyways, first off, how does this guy own all the coconuts? How? This does not abide by the libertarian creed. You have to, in essence, oversimplified, but mix the land with your labor. It is you appropriating from nature, taking it from nature, and putting it into human hands, and giving it that human touch. That's what creates property. More or less oversimplified in a poetic way, I'm saying it. But how can this guy own all the coconuts? Did he plant all the trees? He's a castaway. Is the coconuts the only way that you can survive? I'm sure you can go hunt rodents or guanas or fish. And also, why is this guy being a dick? This is what happens when you meet logic with fantasy. When you meet logic with fantasy, you're going to get fantastic answers. Logic's not going to seem very logical when you remove it out of what its purpose is for. Logic is for this world, the real world. It's for realistic scenarios. This is not realistic. Hell, this is flat out like a false dichotomy. Go fucking fish somewhere else. And he doesn't own all the coconuts. The coconuts belong to nature. You picking the coconuts off the tree, that is you appropriating nature. The coconuts just existing, then you say, "Hear thee, hear thee, I claim that I own all the coconuts." That's not how private property is made, or at least real property. Now, another scenario that some of you may have heard, the steal the penny to save the world scenario. You are presented with the option, steal the penny or the world is destroyed. Every normal person in that scenario would obviously steal the penny. Like, we all know this. Yet again, this is what happens when you meet logic with fantasy. When you meet logic with fantasy, you're going to get fantastic answers. So why are these used as arguments against the non-aggression principle? The non-aggression principle being that the initiation of force or threats is immoral, and that the aggressor is not in the right, and the non-aggressor has the right to do with what he wants with his property. And these are the cream of the crop arguments against the non-aggression principle. Fantastic scenarios that would never exist. You know what? For those out there, I have a real better example. The best critique against the non-aggression principle. Okay? This is the most realistic lifeboat scenario, or coconut island scenario, or steal the penny to save a world scenario. Here's my scenario that I made up. What if there's an active shooter, and you know that your neighbor John has a firearm, and you can go steal that firearm to go stop the active shooter? See, that is way more realistic. And then we can start judging our ethical principles from there. When the scenarios are much more realistic and grounded, then we can start making an ethic for this real world, a morality for everyday moral situations. You try to debunk ethical principles because they don't align with your made up fantastic scenario that will never exist. You're not mature, and you're not mature enough to have a debate. And frankly, I think you're scared that we're right. Let's also talk about argumentation ethics. Now, if you want to go into depth about argumentation ethics, you can go on YouTube and find a plethora of explanations for what is argumentation ethics. But the summary is that the nature of argumentation actually presupposes the nap. So how it works is that if an aggressor initiates aggression upon a non-aggressor, um, in order for the aggressor to justify his morality, his aggression ethic, he has to engage in argumentation. But the nature of argumentation itself presupposes the non-aggression principle, since the act of arguing is to stop fighting and to work out our differences through truth and logic. Again, oversimplified, you need to go do your own thing. This is not an explanation for what argumentation ethics is. But even if argumentation ethics was true. Now, let me clarify. Now, some take argumentation ethics as a justification for the nap. Others take argumentation ethics merely as something value free, not necessarily proposing an ethic, but just outlining the rules of ethics, something meta ethical rather than ethical. Either way, there's a workaround. So Hans Hoppe likens his argumentation ethics to this analogy. Imagine if I were to argue that I am not arguing right now. That would be impossible. In order for me to argue that I'm not arguing, I would have to argue. Same thing applies to argumentation ethics, that if the aggressor engages in arguing that he ought aggress, the nature of argumentation itself presupposes that he ought not aggress. Uh, so Hans Hoppe calls this a performative contradiction. The act of me arguing that I am not arguing is a performative contradiction, just like how the act of arguing for aggression while engaging in peaceful nonviolent activity purposefully, while arguing that even though I am engaging in peaceful action, I ought be violent towards you, is a performative contradiction. Now, for those who think that argumentation ethics justifies the non-aggression principle, first off, a performative contradiction does not necessarily mean the non-aggression principle is true and an aggression ethic is false. Just because any aggressor that attempts to justify his aggression, it ends up being a hypocrite, doesn't mean his proposition is false. That doesn't follow. Hypocrites can still be true. It could be, or hypocrites can still be truthful. Like, for example, I could say that punching people's wrong, I punch you in the face, that makes me a hypocrite. Does that make punching people in the face wrong? Yes, it still does, even though I am a hypocrite and I'm the one who made the claim. At the end of the day, I have a workaround. So, here's my workaround. Let's go back to the analogy um, of arguing that I am not arguing. It is impossible for me to argue that I am not arguing without falling into a performative contradiction. However, someone else can argue on my behalf that I'm not arguing. Someone can say that legal government name is not arguing, and I argue that he is not arguing. And that's not a performative contradiction. So to carry that analogy over, the aggressor literally just needs to hire a lawyer to bypass argumentation ethics. What the aggressor needs is that he needs a third party to advocate and defend his aggressive behavior. The third party won't fall into the performative contradiction since they're not the aggressor. They're merely just defending the aggressor. It would be like as if someone argued on my behalf that I am not arguing while I remain silent. Anyways, one more thing. To further this analogy, if I were to remain silent, It would mean that I am not arguing, but I can never justify it because I would have to remain silent. So, carry this further why the argumentation ethics doesn't justify the non-aggression principle. It is true that the aggressor could never justify his aggression ethic, and therefore his aggression will always remain unjustified. But if he doesn't defend his point, it does not mean his point is false. And then if his point is false and negation is true, that's how we justify the non-aggression principle through argumentation ethics. But there's two things going on here to summarize. Two things going on. First, number one, uno, just because it's a performative contradiction doesn't make it false. And two, if someone argues on behalf of the aggressor, they don't fall into the performative contradiction, thus bypassing the whole gotcha, it's a performative contradiction, aggression is cringe. The non-aggression principle is true. Now, it does hint at a real argument for the non-aggression principle. Now, I've talked about my argument arguing for the non-aggression principle elsewhere, which you can watch those and right over that way. Even though I think that many come from an honest place to justify the non-aggression principle using argumentation ethics, I think it's mistaken. I think at best it clues in on the non-aggression principle being true, and at worst it's a red herring from the real argument, which again, go watch it. I think that's it. I've been playing Battlefield 6. I literally just got done because that's the end of the beta. See you guys on October 17th. Let's play some fucking Battlefield 6. I'm so fucking hyped.